So my name is Maria. I'm one of the head organizers of Valencia 2019, and this module will be on dietary needs and food handling. So as I said in the introductory video, this training will be delivered in two parts. So first, I will talk a bit more about dietary needs. I will review some very basic concepts, and I would also talk about the different types of diet that might exist, at least the most common ones. And then the second part will be a food handling 101. Of course, food handling can get very complicated because there's a lot of things that you have to take into account. But what I will do is I will just summarize some brief aspects that might be useful for your UAP life and just event planning in general. So as I said before, if you have any type of questions, please feel free to interrupt at any point. However, you must know that even if I really love this topic and it's something that I think is super useful, I don't consider myself an expert on this. So I will try to answer all of your questions as best as possible, but I do encourage you to also go and search online for your own national country's legislation, because this is one of the main problems I encountered when preparing this training. So what I'm going to do right now, the things that I will explain are generally very international. However, when it comes to food handling, there's a couple things that might vary depending on your country. And for this, I will let you know exactly what it is so that you can check. So what we'll do, we are going to go through some key learning outcomes. So we are going to find ways to accommodate for dietary needs in event organizing and planning. We also want to know how to offer appropriate food for the most common types of diets. We will also learn how to organize food plans and food master plans to avoid safety concerns. And lastly, we will discover the main types of diets, the sources of bacteria, and some tips to handle food safety. As I said, this is a very brief module, and to be able to give you a very comprehensive module, this would take hours. So I'm just going to condense everything to the key points and the key aspects that you need to take out of it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about dietary needs. So what is a dietary need? So sometimes we, as I've said in the slides, sometimes we see dietary choices as a personal option, but most of the time they are very important and they should be taken seriously. And for this, what I want to say is there are different types of diets as we will see. And of course, there's some types of diets that are some dietary needs. So there's some things that perhaps you are allergic or intolerant, and we'll see what these mean afterwards. And there's other things that you might choose yourself. For example, you might choose to follow a vegetarian diet. And there's also some things that are religious accommodations for food, and this is all something that you need to take into account. So I feel sometimes in organizing, we tend to not really, oh, sorry, there's someone joining. Yeah, so I feel sometimes in organizing, we don't really take the time to consider why someone has decided to follow a special diet. And we think that just because someone has decided to have this preferential diet, there shouldn't be taken very much seriously. But this is something that I'm very against of. And I think that independently of what type of diet you follow and for what reasons you follow this diet, we really should take into account all of them and cater for all of them to the same extent. So dietary restrictions, as I was saying, should not be taken lightly, and everyone should know that they can pose a very serious safety hazard if they serve something that is not right or not in the good condition. It is very important to distinguish at this stage, and this is one of the basic concepts, is intolerance and allergy. So intolerance and allergies are two different types of things. So intolerance is when you are you have sensitivity to some chemicals found in food, and they can be naturally occurring or they can come from the manufacturing. And usually when you have an intolerance, small amounts can be tolerated. For example, some people have a lactose intolerance, and this is not life-threatening, but it does cause serious just discomfort in general. And some symptoms for this include stomach pain, nausea, cramps, bloating, even vomiting, or just irritability or anxiousness. And they can have very unpleasant symptoms, and if they are consistently ignored, so say you are not catering for someone's lactose intolerance throughout the session, and you keep giving them dairy and milk, then it will get to a point most likely that that person suffers long-term damage. Another thing is allergies. So allergies are an immune response to protein that is found in some common foods. And any amount, regardless of how small or how big, will cause a reaction. And it usually occurs, it does depend on the body and it does depend on the person, but it usually occurs within 30 minutes or so. And it really can be life-threatening. If someone does have an allergy reaction, then either you should go to the doctor if this is the first time it happened, or if this person already knows this and has an EpiPen, then in that case, that would be the way to go. But strict avoidance of any type of food that will give that person an allergic reaction is to be avoided, and this is very important. Especially because allergies do have the potential to cause very dangerous and life-threatening reactions, and there's especially some severe causes and cases that might lead to this. So please be very careful. So before going into frequent types of diets, I would like to just give you a small tip on what to do if you are organizing an event. As I said, this does not have to be UIP. This can be anything. You should talk to your venue and discuss with your venue the different types of things and diets that might be important. For example, if you are doing so if they are taking care of the food, then you should tell them, okay, we have this number of vegetarians, this number of gluten-free, and you should specify all of the diets so that they are aware of this. If you're not using your own food and you're bringing your own food, and then it's very important that you talk to them to see if you have a space that you can storage food correctly, and this is very important indeed. So we'll talk a bit more about how to store food and how to do all of this later on, but right now we're going to see some of the most frequent types of dietary needs. Of course, I chose the ones that I feel either are more interesting or most common, but all of the ones that I've included in this presentation and that I will talk about throughout the training, I have experienced before. So even if one might sound very weird, I have seen this happening before. So this is why I'm giving you some tips. Before going on, if there's something that I need to make sure you really understand, is that special diets might be a big just hassle to deal with in the beginning, especially when it's a small session. And even when it's a very large session, you have so many things to think about that taking into account dietary needs can be very, very time consuming. However, it's very important, and you must understand that, and I will say this later on, but if you, for example, are a vegetarian, you can eat way more than a salad. So let's start with the first type, and I already mentioned this before. So this is one of the most common types of food of dietary needs is a lactose intolerance. So participants that may have this intolerance are unable to digest lactose, which is a type of sugar that is found in milk and other dairy products. So as we've seen before, this is instead of being considered an allergy itself, it is being considered an intolerance, which means it is generally not life-threatening, but however, there's very different degrees to which someone might be intolerant, and perhaps someone can actually have an allergy of this. So just very graphically, I think you can actually see this, and this might be very annoying. Okay, so some of the things that you may want to avoid are butter, cheese, cream in general, and that is not only ice cream, but also cream and sauces that might be used, for example, in spaghetti. And then also milk powder, yogurt, all these kind of things that the things you want to try to avoid. For example, you might want to try to find another alternative. For example, milk. It's very easy to go for soy milk or almond milk. But don't feel afraid to talk to that person and just see, like, to what extent are you lactose intolerant? Is there anything that you can't eat? So for example, someone can't eat soy and then you're giving them soy milk, and then that would just not work, right? So those are the ingredients that you will try to avoid. But then there are other ingredients that I labeled as safe, which are, for example, eggs. They are generally fine. Fruits, meat, nuts, seafood, just in generally any other thing that does not contain this lactose, this sugar that is contained generally in milk. Another diet that we find very, very often, especially more in recent times, I've seen this growing exponentially. So we have vegetarian diets. So at any events, it is very easy to assume, as I was saying before, that vegetarians would only eat salad. And I'm not a vegetarian myself, but I've seen, and I'm even to blame at times when organizing smaller events, that you just think the easiest way to go is just give the vegetarian one a salad and then be happy. But this is not the case. There are very tasty options that vegetarians can eat, and it is important to give them the opportunity to just eat healthily, but eat well too. So what you would try to avoid is things that basically contain meat or fish. There's of course some people that do eat fish, but generally when someone states they're vegetarian in a form, you must take into account that that would technically mean they do not eat fish either. A very important thing that you must take into account is that when catering for vegetarians, and this also includes vegans that I will talk about next, you must make sure that the list of ingredients it does not have any hidden meat products. And for this, I mean, for example, cheese with animal rennet. This is very common and we don't really think this is the case, but it does contain some meat products and then would not be a good option for vegetarians. This is also the case for gelatin, and even some types of candy do include some meat products in it. Generally, vegetarian people are safe eating just dairy, eggs, fruits, grain, vegetables, roots, just some other things that don't contain meat or fish. Another important diet, and another diet that we see very often, is vegan diets. This is way more strict than vegetarian, in the sense that people who do not follow this diet not only do not eat meat nor fish, but do not eat any product that is derived from them. For example, they would not eat an egg because it comes from the chicken, if this makes any sense. So you would try to avoid things like butter, dairy, of course, meat, seafood, but also gelatin, honey. And honey is one of the ones that we tend to forget. But they are safe to eat any other thing. So for example, fruits, grains, legumes, nuts. And here you have to also take into account what I was saying before. When you have someone that is vegan or vegetarian, giving them a salad for 10 days is just not an option. So I would suggest thinking about some other creative options. For example, you can make chickpea fajitas, and I've done that in the past, and they're very happy with it because they get to eat something at least more normal, let's say, than just a salad every single day. So be creative and don't be afraid to ask that person, hey, so what do you eat normally? Because I'm not familiar with this. And this is something that I did just like a couple of hours ago. I have an organizer that is vegan, and we are planning to have sandwiches on one of the day, and I texted her and said like, hey, I'm not the most familiar with this type of diet. When you eat a sandwich, what type of sandwich do you eat? And she said, well, hummus and some lettuce, for example. And that is something that I wouldn't have thought myself. So don't be afraid to ask. Another diet is peanut allergies. And this is something that is more like an allergy and not a special diet. Peanut allergies, of course, you have to avoid nuts. And this, although it sounds very obvious and it doesn't sound like something that you would not think about, it's very hard. Why? Because peanut can be contained in a lot of ingredients. For example, you might not realize that a certain type of ice cream does have peanut, or that some types of cookies, or some types of just general, a lot of things, bread, any type of just cake, sweet stuff generally has peanut. So be very careful and check all of the ingredients to make sure that you do not have any problem with peanut allergies. And I'm not sure if I am going to say this after or if I should have said it before, but an important thing to consider with allergies is that cross-contamination may occur. And this is if something is handled in a way that it could contain traces, for example. So for example, if I buy something from a big, just like shop that has a lot of foods, then it's very common that you will have this thing saying, this may contain traces. And you have to be very careful with this because you do not know the extent of the allergy of someone. You do not know if someone is extremely allergic, and if something just slightly touched the food they are eating, that is life-threatening to them. So please make sure, check all the labels. And yeah, I am remembering, I will say this afterwards, I think. Check all the labels and make sure no traces are contained. And just it's safe to eat. So I wanted to include this diet because I thought it's very interesting. We don't generally know what to do with it, and it's diabetes. So the diabetic are unable to produce generally insulin and must monitor the sugar, the blood sugar level. So in order to accommodate their needs, you need to be very careful with sweets and also with drinks. And this is something that I knew AP and we are to blame in Valencia too, because it's very easy to get sponsors for things that are not as healthy. And then you have to take into account that there's people that perhaps have to control the amount of sugar they eat. And something that I found very interesting when researching for this type of diet is, for example, you have to avoid food that can be from bread to pasta, potatoes, but there's even some fruits that are not good for people with diabetes. That is, for example, melon or pineapple, because they have a lot of GI. So yeah, I thought this was very interesting to share with you. Another very extremely complicated diet is gluten-free diet. This is not as common, but there are people that have a celiac disease, and this is generally the hardest, especially because remember I was talking about cross-contamination before, which meant when something is placed in a place it shouldn't be placed, and it gets in touch with something that has other characteristics. So in this case, something gluten-free touches something that is not gluten-free, and then it's contaminated with gluten. And it would not be safe for someone with celiac disease to eat. So the participants that have this condition have to avoid gluten, because if they don't, they will have an inflammation in the small intestine. And this, I'm not gluten-free myself, but I have a couple friends that are, and it really can get very unpleasant. For this, you have to avoid a lot of food that you don't really get to know that often, for example, barley or kamut, but others are very common, for example, wheat. This can get very complicated because, as I said, wheat is something that is in a lot of food. So that would be bread, pasta. So you have to make sure that either you find a good substitute for it, or you buy the gluten-free option, and that this option cannot contain traces, or it is not contaminated. What would be safe to eat would be, for example, corn, nuts, rice, potatoes, quinoa. All of this would be fine to eat, and as you can see, they're not options that are not as normal. So I would say when planning, for example, a meal, if you can choose between pasta or rice, going for rice might be nice, just to make sure you can accommodate for more people and it's safe to eat. Then another very interesting diet, and I saw this back in 2016, I think. There were 3 girls that followed a paleo diet. So this type of diet is based on the types of food that are presumed to have been eaten in the early times. So the food choices generally consist on meat, fish, vegetables, fruit, and they exclude dairy and just processed food in general. So for this, you might want to avoid dairy, grains, legumes, potatoes, but it's safe to eat eggs or seafood, seeds, meat. It's really fine, but just be careful, especially with the type of processing that food has gone through. So lastly, I wanted this last slide. I have some general tips, but this last slide on diets to be about religious accommodation. I feel like we generally do not take into account the different type of religious diets, if that is a thing, and that there are. And I thought that we should start taking into account. And I decided to mention the two that I found most interesting. Of course, there are many religions out there, and there's a lot of things that are also important. I just haven't come across them, so I don't really know as much of them. So the two ones that I decided to talk about is kosher. In kosher diets, you need to make sure that the meat products are butchered in a certain way, and they cannot include, for example, shellfish and pork. It's also very interesting that participants who follow this diet will also abstain from eating dairy and meat at the same time. And this, again, sounds very easy to remember, but it is not, because when you buy pizzas, for example, you do not think this person is vegetarian. You think they just don't eat pork, for example. So you decide to buy any type of pizza that contains any type of other meat. But then, of course, pizza has cheese and meat, and then you won't be able to eat. So it's something that you have to take into account, because it's harder than it may seem, and especially, for example, if you cook chicken with some sort of yogurt sauce, for example, this might also be very complicated and may cause problems. Another interesting religious diet is halal. So halal meat is prepared and blessed in a particular manner, and you would need to accommodate the way this is prepared in order to make it able to eat. Yes, I used to have more information on this, but oh yeah, sorry. So yeah, as I was saying, halal needs meat to be prepared and blessed in a particular manner, and certain animal meat products are not allowed to be consumed from a halal diet. So this would be any animal that has not been ritually slaughtered, including those that have died for a natural cause or injury, pigs, birds of prey, reptiles, mules, pests, and other insects. And also specific organs are prohibited, and including bladder and flowing blood. Also, ingredients that have been contaminated by or derived from non-halal animal products are also not allowed in this diet. So there's something that you need to be very careful, and perhaps if you have someone that follows this diet, make sure you really go through every single site that you can find, and make sure that you know what is permitted and what isn't. And so before going into the second part of the module, I think I'm going a bit over time, so that's why I'm talking fast. There's some general tips that I wanted to give you. First one is know your food. Know where it comes from and what exactly it contains. So this means you will receive, for example, a packet of food from a certain sponsor. You need to make sure you know exactly what ingredients that has, and you know where it comes from, what type of shop it comes to, what type of products they process in that other shop, to make sure you, if anything comes up, you know exactly what it is that caused the problem, and you can improve for the future. The second thing that I wanted to really get across for this first part of the training is to make sure your menu is appealing for different groups. So as I said, it's very easy to just fall into vegetarians eat salad. There's a lot of options to have people really enjoy their meal, and it just takes a little more time to think, what would I want to eat if for 10 days, for example, if I followed this diet. Another thing that is very important for you to think about, some general tips, is you can substitute certain ingredients that are not allowed by others, but you have to also take into account that perhaps someone, and this gets complicated, perhaps someone not only has one allergy or one intolerance, but has several. So this might take a little time to investigate really on what options exist. And if you have any problems, just talk to that person, and I'm sure that that person will be fine. And that is actually the next point that I want to talk about. So never be afraid to have a conversation. No one knows better than that person what they're able to eat. And certainly most people, at least that I come across with, are happy to talk about it, because of course that would mean better food for them and better accommodation of their needs. So feel free and happy to talk to someone if you do not know what to give them to eat. One more thing is educate your organizer. So that is, if you are head organizer, if you are an MC board member, if you are someone that has a group of people and you are going to organize an event, make sure the people around you know all of this. Make sure they know the different types of diets at the event. Make sure they know what options there are, and just make sure they know general principles in general, because that would save a lot of problems. And of course, you are not the only one that is going to be there at all times. So it can get very complicated to know who is who and who has this diet if there's not more people that can help you out with this problem. So this, up to now, is the part for dietary needs. It was very fast, and this is just a general overview. There's a lot of diets, a lot of different types of diets that people may follow, and I just encourage you to investigate more on them, especially when you have this form with dietary needs. Just make sure you can create the right menu for the right people. So next part is one that is very important. I feel we never gave much importance to this aspect in AYP. I think food handling is something that we really have to improve. But it is one of the things that changes depending on legislation. For example, in Spain, it is required that if someone has a business, of course we are not businesses, but I like to think that if we act like a business, we can avoid both safety problems and legal problems in the future. So in Spain, it is required that the person in charge of the business, in this case that would be project manager, head organizer, MC, delivers training on food handling. So this part is very small. My organizers will receive way more information, but this is a small module on food handling, and especially in UAP. So the first thing that we have to think about is what makes people sick from food. So we have three main sources. We have physical, that is objects that are in food and they may cause injury, and that would be, for example, a small piece of glass that can be there because something broke and you didn't clean the area properly. It might be jewelry, that is something that I don't generally wear, but of course, if you're wearing, I don't know, a watch, it's very easy to get some bacteria or some germs there that fall into the food very easily and can cause contamination. Also plasters, so when you have a cut and you decide, okay, I'm gonna put a plaster or Band-Aid in my finger, that might be less beneficial than actually just not touching the food at all. Also staples, hair, fingernails, everything has to be nice and clean, and just make sure that the area where you're handling the food is clean. Another thing that can make people sick is biological sources. So this can be germs that cannot be seen, and this is parasites, bacteria, viruses, and one of the ones that is most common is bacteria. And for this, I remember when I studied a little course on nutrition, and they showed us this thing that's called fat Tom. And fat tom is the criteria or the requirements for bacteria to reproduce very fast. And I wanted to tell you what fat tom stands for. So first we have food. So that's the F for fat. So basically high protein, high carbohydrates food, such as meat, potato, or pasta, are more likely to hold bacteria. Then we also have acidity, so that is the A, fat. So foods that are slightly acidic also have tendency to have bacteria, but generally lemon, for example, that is highly acidic will not be a nice cozy space for bacteria to grow. And this is why, I don't know if you've seen this very often, but if someone just doesn't have the products to sanitize something, you might see people cleaning stuff with lemon, because it generally, since it's so acidic, you know that it's a natural way, let's say, to sanitize instruments. Now the T for fat is the temperature. So bacteria rapidly reproduces from 5 degrees Celsius to 57. So this is a very dangerous zone. Of course, if it is refrigerated, it should be below 5, and if you cook it, it's before 100. It's over 100 or close to it. So that's a way to kill bacteria, to at least not have it reproduce as fast. And then we have tom. So tom is time. So you have to give enough time for bacteria to create. Of course, if you have the temperature that is required for bacteria to grow rapidly, then of course the time for it to grow rapidly would be shorter. Another special characteristic of bacteria is that it may or may not need oxygen. So that is the tall. So anaerobic bacteria does not require oxygen, while aerobic bacteria does require oxygen. And then the last one is moisture. So that's fat tom. Moisture indeed is very important to have a cozy environment for bacteria to grow. So if you store something in a fresh, just dry area, then bacteria will hopefully not reproduce as fast. So this is just very theoretical aspects, just to know exactly what is it that makes you feel sick when you eat something that is not in best state. So, as I said, this is very fast. So I wanted to make sure that you know personal hygiene does influence food safety. That is, if you do not wash your hands, of course, you most likely can contaminate your food with the germs that you have in your hands, and you have, and I have, and this is super normal. So I decided to point out some very short do's and don'ts. Of course, I try to cater this to AYP, and I know that some things are just not feasible. For example, as I say in the do's, make sure long hair like mine is up in a ponytail, and if you do have caps, and I understand this is something that is very complicated in AYP, then make sure hair is properly tucked so that you can avoid hairs just falling into the food. Also, nails, and here again, this is CYP, and I understand everyone does whatever they want to do with their appearance and look. But if your nails are an appropriate length and clean, then there's less likelihood that you will just make bacteria contaminate other food. You should also wash your hands properly or wear gloves. And for this, later on, I'm gonna not show you, but I'm gonna try to teach you a way to wash your hands properly. So make sure this is something important for personal hygiene. And also clothes should be clean. Of course, if you have a business, then you would try to have light clothes, and you will try to clean it every now and then. In UAP, we tend to just wear something. We don't have time to go to accommodation and change. So this is complicated, but of course, just try to not be full of dirt and be touching food. Don't just try to avoid wearing jewelry in general. For example, you know, this kind of long feather earrings that are very nice during the summer, then those also have like little hairs, and it's very easy to contaminate food that way. And also, if you have open and bleeding wounds, because you just fell and you cut yourself with some piece of glass that was on the floor or something, which it would be very dramatic, and just make sure you do not handle food, because I think this is common sense. It is very easy to contaminate food if you have an open bleeding wound. So last, this part is a bit intense. So when you handle food, there's different types of processes that you go through. And I decided to tell you about the 5 most common ones. There's one that I decided to omit, which is cooking, and I did that because although some sessions do have cooking, and I have been at a session where I cooked myself, this is something that is not as common, and also something that in general we should try to avoid, because we are not experts in cooking. We do not know exactly, we do not have things to measure the right temperature of meat, for example, and this can get just not safe in general. So the first thing that we do when we set up a coffee break, for example, if we go and buy the food that we're going to serve. So this is something very interesting, but when you buy things, you have to follow a certain order. So for example, you buy non-perishables, and then the right way to do it is then after doing all your shopping for non-perishables, you go to the refrigerated area. So that is, you're walking through the supermarket and you see just a bag of, let's say, fries, and it's easier for you to get it right now and then go buy the rest of the things. But it makes more sense from a food safety perspective to do that last. That's because the longer that stays outside of the refrigerated area, the more likely it is for bacteria to just attack or grow in that food. Another thing that you might want to take into account when purchasing is, if you are indeed buying meat or poultry or just something that used to be alive, then an interesting thing is that you should not buy anything that is in a package that is torn or is leaking. And that includes, for example, cold cuts or ham. So if you're buying something for coffee break to have just nice toasts, just make sure that the package is nicely closed and is not leaking. Last tip for purchasing then, of course, this is quite obvious, but whenever you buy something, and this is for yourself too, for your house, make sure to check the sell by or use by date, and you should never buy something that has been over expiration date. You should also never serve something that has gone through over expiration date. However, there's 2 types of dates that you might find. You might find expiration or consume before or eat before. This last type is safe to eat even after the date, and is something that, of course, I am a fan of, because then food waste is reduced. The only thing that happens when you eat something that has gone over that date is that perhaps the nutritional value is not as high anymore, or that the, let's say, texture of chips, for example, is not as crispy anymore. But they're safe to eat, of course, in a reasonable time, and I would personally not throw it away. Okay, second stage is storage. So once you've bought your stuff, you went to the supermarket, you got everything, then you get to the accommodation or whatever venue where you can store things, and you have to just get all your food or all the things that you bought and get it into the right place. So when something is refrigerated, make sure to refrigerate them within 2 hours, or even within 1 hour if the temperature is above 30 degrees. That is, in Spain right now, in Valencia, I'm here right now, I would need to store food in less than an hour because it's so hot that it's very easy for bacteria to reproduce. Also, you have to check the temperature of your refrigerator or freezer to make sure that I don't know, no one has turned it lower, or nothing has happened, and the refrigerator should be around 5 degrees Celsius, whereas the freezer, it would be great if it's at -15 or so. More things, canned goods, so let's say baked beans that tend to be in a can, they are safe generally indefinitely, as long as they are not exposed to freezing temperatures or temperatures above 30 degrees just with sun heating. Also, if the cans look okay, that is if they're not chipped or if they don't have any small hole or oxidate or anything, then they're generally safe to eat too. Also, things such as tomatoes or fruits that might be canned are generally safe to eat always, but they're better quality if they're up to 12 to 18 months. And then food that is less acidic, such as meat or vegetables, would likely last for like 2 to 5 years. So that is that for storage. And now we go to preparation. So we bought our stuff, we stored our stuff, and now we're going to prepare coffee break. We're going to make toast. So as I said, you need to wash your hands to make sure everything's safe. And the optimal time is between 20 and 40 seconds washing your hands with warm water and soap. So I decided to find this song that would allow you to know when you washed your hands for 20 seconds. And this is the time where I sing now. So the way it would go is I would be washing my hands with warm water and soap. And in my head, I'd be singing, if you dirty and you know it, wash your hands. If you're dirty and you know it, wash your hands. If you're dirty and you know it, and you really want to show it, then your hands will surely show it. If you're dirty and you know it, wash your hands. So yeah, I didn't really sing that properly, but basically it's the if you're happy and you know it, but with a slightly funny song. So yes, someone, okay. So if you do not have access to water, then make sure to have hand sanitizer with you, and this can be purchased at any shop. Lastly, make sure to avoid cross-contamination and keep raw meat and fish or their juices away from other food. Of course, if you are cutting food, make sure to use different countertops for vegetables, for meat, and for different types of food. And also cutting boards and utensils must be sanitized. Last part, when you're serving, make sure that that hot food is held above 60 degrees Celsius or warmer, and then cold food should be stored at 5 or served, at 5 degrees or colder. This is very complicated when it's warm and when we are doing a coffee break in a park. But of course, you can attempt to do this, and if it's feasible, having ice, for example, for cold things, things that should be kept in cold, then that's a very good option. I'm sorry because this has been very long. I'm doing a bit more. Okay, so then, of course, perishable food should not be left out more than 2 hours at room temperature, or 1 hour when it's above 30 degrees. So again, in Valencia, if we are having for coffee break toast with ham, then it should not be left outside for more than an hour. Lastly, for cleaning or leftovers, then you have to discard any leftovers that has been left outside for more than 2 hours or 1 hour if it's 30 degrees. Also, if there are cooked leftovers that have been kept for more than 4 days. And you also have to make sure when you reheat leftovers, you reheat it to at least 70 degrees Celsius, if possible. So the last part of this I want to mention is types of allergens. And with this, I promise that I do finish. So there are different types of allergens. Allergens are generally the things that that are most common. There are 14 types in most places. In Spain, there's I think 2 more. So for this, you really have to check your national legislation and national regulation on this. But there's certain foods that contain, of course, these ingredients, and you have to be specially aware of them. So the best way, before going into what exactly each of them is and what they include very fast, the best thing to do whenever you are, for example, setting up a coffee break would be to just indicate the foods that contain any of these 14 allergens. Of course, this can be very complicated, and if you are not able to do this, then a great option would be to do it the other way around. So if you know something does not have gluten, then specify no gluten here. Or if you know something does not have egg, then go for no egg. Whatever you do, it is quite important to make sure that you label these foods, and it can get very complicated. And of course, especially I was thinking about this for Valencia, there's so much food and there's so many people, it can be very difficult to label everything, but at least just try to make the effort. And even if you are not labeling everything, at least make sure you know your food, as I was saying before, and you know the people that can have allergies to this kind of allergens, to make sure you inform them on these conditions. So very fast, I am going to go through some of the types of allergen. I am specifically going to mention the ones that I know are most present anyway. So then that would be celery, and it sounds something that is very not common, but celery is common because it includes celery stalks, leaves, seeds, and you can find celery salads, or you can even include them in some meat products or soups, or even stock cubes that you use for cooking. So it sounds something that is not very common, but actually you have to be careful because it is. You have crustaceans. So that is crabs, lobster, prawns. This is something that is not really common, but of course, if you have a salad that includes some crab, then it's something that you should label. Eggs are very common. They're often found in cakes, meat products, mayonnaise, mousses, pasta if it's fresh, quiche, sauces, pastry, or just foods that are brushed or glazed with eggs. We also have cereals that contain gluten, and this we talked about before, but this would be wheat, barley, oats, pasta, bread, just an infinite list of foods, cereal that contain gluten. Another thing would be fish. Of course, you can find fish in fish, but also in fish sauces, some pizzas, salad dressings, and stock cubes again. Another interesting one I never heard before this would be lupin. So lupin is a type of flour, but it's also found in flour. So they are used for some types of bread, pastries, and even in pasta. So you have to be careful to make sure that lupin is if lupin is an ingredient of the food you're serving, and if it is, just be aware and make sure you either label it or be very aware of it. Milk is of course a common ingredient in butter, cheese, cream, milk powders, yogurt, and just anything that might be brushed again or glazed with milk. It is also common in some powdered soups or sauces. Another common one would be nuts. This is very similar to what I was saying before. Nuts can be found in breads, in pastry, can be found in many things, and it's most common than we think, and we have to be very aware of the traces. So soya, that would be very common for a substitute of meat. So generally, if you have a vegetarian diet and you want to find something, then you would go for soya beans, for example. And this is an allergen, so that means there could be quite a lot of people that are potentially allergic or intolerant to this. And lastly, of course, there's a lot of things. I'm going quite fast, and this is something you should investigate further, especially once you have your food master plan, to see what exactly you have. But sulfur dioxide is something that is very interesting, and this is an ingredient that is used in dried fruit, such as raisins or prunes. And you might also find it in some meat products, soft drinks, vegetables, and also, and not most importantly, but of course we do have this quite a lot in AYP, especially in formal ceremonies, wine and beer. So this is something that you should be aware of. So last thing I want to say, and this is, I promise, the last thing. Of course, I've been talking about allergens and how they're very important, but how can you identify allergens in food? So generally, allergens in food, again, it depends on national legislation, but they are labeled generally in two cases. First, either when they are used as ingredients to produce the food, and in this case, they must, at least in some countries, be highlighted in the label, either in bold, in italics, underlined, or in caps. You will find, for example, sulfur dioxide in a bottle of wine. Go check around your house. Perhaps it's not the case in your country, but yeah, it is something very interesting to note. And generally, the food allergens in food are also clearly labeled when they are present as traces. And this is generally with a small asterisk or star, and you will find this link saying this may contain traces of. And this is the case, as I said before, when the food is generally produced alongside other products in a large factory. So yeah, so lastly, it's very important that even if you have already checked, so even if you know this type of bread or this brand of bread has gluten or does not have gluten, then it is very important to go check every now and then, because things change and brands improve or change ingredients. So make sure every time you serve something, you do check the label, and you do check if there's any allergen, and you do take into account what type of people you're catering for to make sure you accommodate best to their needs. So that would be it. Of course, this has been very intense, and I have not talked about super important things. I have tried to briefly go through the most important things that I can think of that you must know. But yeah, make sure to investigate a bit more. Of course, if you have any problem, any doubt, any question, I am happy to receive all your questions, and I'm sure together we can work something out. We can talk about the different options you might have for a menu, and hopefully you'll be able to help you better in this. I also recommend people that are product managers or, as I said, board members, to consider delivering a training to their people on food handling, to make sure the greatest amount of people are informed on how to deal with food and what type of food are there, so that we are not ignorant. And also check your national legislation to make sure you comply with it too. So make sure you, whenever you set up a coffee break, if there is some allergic reaction, make sure it is not your fault first, and if there is something, make sure that you have delivered training to the people serving the food, so that at least responsibility for it is not as strong. At least you knew what you were doing, or it was a mistake, but it wasn't that you were not well trained. So this was it for my side. I am going to check the chat now to see if someone asked me any question, but of course you can ask me any question right now. And yeah, the last thing that I want to say is, and as I said this in the beginning, it is very, very hard to cater properly. It is very hard when you are organizing a big scale event or even a small scale event, and you have to deal with master plans, venues, this and that, and program and officials. It's very complicated. It takes some time to do this, and no one is expecting you to handle food excellently or to not have any mistakes, because of course you are going to have a mistake, and I know I will have a mistake. I will make a mistake, but just at least try to be informed and try to reduce the amount of mistakes. And hopefully in a couple of years, we'll be able to analyze perfectly who can eat what and how to cater properly for everyone to enjoy food at a session. So yes, let's see. Okay. Oh, sorry, someone said, oh, someone wanted to join. Okay. Okay. So if no one has any questions, then well, thank you everyone for joining. As I said, I'm here for you. I'm here to help you. I will do my best to answer as soon as possible for any of your questions. Of course, take into account that this couple of weeks are going to be quite intense, but I'm happy to help you. Also, I will make my materials available quite soon, and you might also want to check them out. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you have learned something, even if it has been very fast and you were crammed with information, and hopefully you have learned something and this is helpful for you. Thank you everyone, and hoping to see you soon.